welcome to this explainer. Look, today we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to take a strictly factual, cold hard facts look at what we're calling the shadow files. We're going to examine some deeply uncomfortable historical records. I'm talking about events that have been completely verified by documents, yet somehow they've been largely buried by time. As someone who absolutely loves to organize and make sense of complex information, I've got to say, this dive into the archives is just fascinating. Have you ever stopped to wonder what's actually missing from our history books? It's a pretty compelling thought, right? Well, today, we are looking right past the sanitized versions of history you might be used to. We're going to use nothing but official data, unclassified government documents, and verified investigations. We are going straight to the source material. Okay, let's dive into this because we are talking about some truly staggering events. We've got a documented secret plot to overthrow a sitting U.S. president, soldiers who were literally ordered to march straight toward nuclear blasts, and a domestic police force dropping a bomb on its own city. No way, right? But yes, it's all real, it's all proven, and we're going to explore all of it in this explainer. To make sense of 500 years of incredibly complex history, here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at erasing indigenous nations, profit over human lives, citizens as test subjects, violence against domestic communities, and finally, uncovering the truth. All right, Section 1, Erasing Indigenous Nations. Long before America was even a country, this land was heavily populated with thriving, established nations. But what happened next was a staggering population collapse. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of it. We're talking about a drop from an estimated 10 to 18 million indigenous people down to fewer than 300,000 by the year 1900. Now, while European diseases accidentally caused a massive amount of devastation early on, official historical records show this wasn't all just an accident. Actually, British commanders wrote letters to one another, letters we literally still have today, detailing a deliberate tactic of handing out infected blankets from smallpox hospitals during peace meetings to intentionally spark deadly outbreaks. And a systemic erasure followed. The U.S. government signed over 400 treaties promising land and protection, and then systematically broke them. After the 1830 Indian Removal Act, the Cherokee actually won a Supreme Court case protecting their land, but President Andrew Jackson simply ignored the ruling. That led directly to the 1838 Trail of Tears, where federal troops forced 16,000 Cherokee to march 1,000 miles in the dead of winter. 4,000 died on the way. Then, jumping to the 1870s, the government set up civilization programs, forcing Native children into boarding schools, expressly designed to, and this was their phrase, kill the Indian, save the man. Recent investigations have uncovered many unmarked graves at these sites. And incredibly, the laws playing kids into these schools didn't legally end until 1978. Moving right along to Section 2, Profit over Human Lives. As we shift our focus into the 1900s, we run into two distinct but somehow deeply connected events, the 1933 business plot and the 1928 banana massacre down in Colombia. Putting these side by side really reveals the extreme lengths powerful men went to when their wealth was threatened, whether that was by economic reform during the Great Depression here at home or by worker strikes in South America. So let's look at the verified details. In the business plot, wealthy elites panicked over FDR's economic plans. They recruited a highly decorated Marine, General Smedley Butler, hoping he'd lead an army of 500,000 desperate World War I veterans in a literal coup to install a dictatorship. Butler actually played along just to gather evidence, and then he reported the whole scheme to Congress. A committee confirmed it was completely real, but major newspapers just mocked Butler, Congress quietly scrubbed the plotters' names from the record, and nobody was ever arrested. Meanwhile, over in Colombia, 25,000 United Fruit Company workers went on strike just for basic rights, like a 6-day workweek. After the U.S. government warned they might send warships to protect American property, the Colombian army trapped the sleeping strikers. Well over 1,000 people were killed by machine gun fire, and their bodies were dumped into the sea. United Fruit, which you probably know today as Chiquita, faced zero consequences at the time. They only got a fine decades later in 2007 for paying a recognized terrorist group. Which brings us to Section 3, Citizens as Test Subjects. So the crucial point here is what happened during the Cold War. Official records show that government began treating its own military and even unsuspecting citizens like lab rats. Take Operation Northwoods from 1962. This wasn't some fringe conspiracy on the internet. It was a fully documented plan drafted and signed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the absolute top military leaders. They proposed staging fake domestic terrorist attacks. We're talking about sinking refugee boats, blowing up ships, and detonating bombs in cities like Miami and Washington, D.C., all to create artificial outrage to justify invading Cuba.
The only reason it didn't happen is because President John F. Kennedy flatly said no and pushed the lead general out to NATO.
And if you look at the sheer scope of these institutional experiments, it's honestly hard to wrap your head around. Just look at the human cost. You've got Operation Desert Rock, where over 50,000 U.S. troops were marched right into 69 nuclear blasts just to see how they'd hold up. Operation Ranch Hand, which sprayed 20 million gallons of toxic Agent Orange over Southeast Asia. The Tuskegee study, which intentionally denied basic medicine to 399 black farmers. And of course, MK-Ultra, which secretly dosed unsuspecting citizens with LSD to study mind control. Now, what's really interesting about this is the massive, documented paper trail of cover-ups that followed. In Desert Rock, soldiers were literally ordered to remove their radiation badges, and the government aggressively denied their leukemia claims until a law in 1990 finally offered some limited payouts. With Agent Orange, internal documents proved Monsanto knew the chemical dioxin was highly toxic, yet a 1984 settlement let chemical companies totally avoid admitting any legal fault for severe birth defects. In the Tuskegee study, government doctors hid a simple penicillin cure for decades just to observe the disease. That caused the generational distrust in medicine that we still see today. And with MK-Ultra, after the highly suspicious death of scientist Frank Olson, the CIA director actually ordered the entire program's files destroyed to stop investigators in their tracks.
Okay, Section 4, Violence Against Domestic Communities.
Let's take a purely objective look at two historical instances where domestic authorities used extreme military-style violence against their own citizens. These are separated by over 6 decades. The 1921 destruction of Tulsa's Greenwood District, which is widely known as Black Wall Street, and the 1985 MOVE bombing on Osage Avenue in Philadelphia. It gives us a stark comparison between a 1920s racially motivated massacre and a 1980s police standoff with a back-to-nature activist group. Just to ground us in the reality of this, look at the physical scale of destruction when civic authorities turn weapons on residential neighborhoods. In Tulsa, roughly 1,200 homes were burned to ashes. In Philadelphia, 61 homes were completely destroyed in a single day. That is, entire neighborhoods just gone. In Tulsa, back in 1921, the violence was initially sparked by a false accusation. From there, local police literally handed out National Guard weapons to a white mob. Witnesses even reported small airplanes dropping firebombs onto the neighborhood from the sky. Between 100 and 300 people were killed, and the surviving residents, they were rounded up and locked into holding camps. Afterward, insurance claims were entirely denied, a grand jury blamed the black community itself for the destruction, and the whole event was just scrubbed from state textbooks. Even after an official state investigation in 2001 finally admitted the truth, their recommendations to financially compensate the survivors were completely ignored.
Then, fast forward to Philadelphia in 1985. Police were in a standoff with the MOVE group. To breach a fortified rooftop bunker, a police helicopter dropped actual FBI-supplied C4 explosives onto a residential row house. A fire broke out, and the city's fire commissioner explicitly ordered his crews to stand down and just let the neighborhood burn. 11 people died in those flames, including 5 kids. And amazingly, 0 criminal charges were filed against any official. None. The city didn't officially apologize until 35 years later, in 2020. And as a final, grim footnote to all of this, the families only found out in 2021 that their children's unburied remains had been secretly kept by universities for research for decades.
Finally, Section 5, Uncovering the Truth. It is absolutely crucial to understand exactly how we know about these shadow files today. Every single event we've discussed here is thoroughly documented. They reside in declassified national archives, congressional investigations, court settlements, and official state apologies. I really want to highlight this paper trail. There are no conspiracy theories here. It is verified, cold, hard historical record that simply required decades of persistence to finally drag into the light. There's a quote from the source material that really hits the nail on the head. Imagine what they've done that we don't even know about. When you sit back and reflect on the fact that top-secret documents like the Operation Northwoods memo sat locked in a vault until 1997, or how incredibly long it took for internal corporate science proving Agent Orange's toxicity to surface in court, yeah, that quote truly resonates. So, what does this all mean for us today? If these staggering events were effectively hidden for decades, why is understanding these suppressed historical truths vital to navigating our present day? Well, understanding the past, especially the meticulously documented, really uncomfortable parts, is the ultimate tool for evaluating the institutions and structures we rely on right now.
I hope this explainer has sparked your curiosity to always seek out those structured facts and maybe look just a little closer at the official records that shape our world.